Thank you very much, Lana, and good morning, good day, in fact, to our wonderful IPLS colleagues. Thank you so much for joining our webinar. We're very excited to be starting with this one and hopefully leading into further training around the aspects of examining with the achievement test, the IPLS curriculum. So really quickly, we've got a lot to get through today. So just going to introduce myself. As you can see, my name on the screen there is Jo Newton-Stone, and my role here, which I'll be talking a little bit more about later, as well as being the Chief Examiner for International Primary and Lower Secondary English achievement tests. I'm also a trainer for IPLS as well. So I've had the pleasure of doing lots of online training and lots of face-to-face training, meeting my lovely colleagues around the world. Anne, would you just like to introduce yourself, please?
Thanks, Jo. Yes, good morning, everyone. It's nice to come together in this format. The meeting is going to be quite extensive today, so I'm not going to rabbit on, you'll be pleased to hear. I'm chair for both the secondary and the primary examinations for IPLSC. It works very well in that we manage then to get a nice uniformity across both papers, and I think Jo will agree with that, as she also has the role in both papers. I'm just going to hand over to Jo, and I'll come back in and out as and when I may need to add anything. Nice to meet you all. Very pleased that you've all managed to get here today. Jo says it's raining for her. It's not raining for me, but it's flipping freezing here. Okay. I don't know what you've got there. I'll sign off now. I'll introduce Jo again, and I will come back in as and when I need to. Thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you, Anne. So we have quite a compact session today. We've got a lot of information to share with you. So please be aware that we do have questions and answers at the end of the session. So without wish, usually I like to have lots of discussions and interaction and things, but a lot of information in this one to share. So please feel free to use the chat box as we go through, but or maybe just note down questions that you want to save until the end. Okay, thank you very much. Right, so without further ado then, let's have a look at what we're going to be covering this session. So as we can see here, first of all, we're going to have an overview of the writing and content production process. Anne and I really thought it was important to be able to share that this is actually a really extensive, robust process. So we'll talk through what actually happens there. How do your papers arrive in the condition that they do for your students, your candidates, to enter the achievement tests? We'll also be looking at the marking process as well, because as a teacher myself, and Anne has also been a teacher for many, many years, we know that it's really important that our students and their hard work is recognised with accuracy in marking. So we'll look at how we actually ensure that. And a key aspect of today's session is that we're going to be looking at the JEH 11 Principal Examiner Feedback Report from 2310. So if you're not familiar with when I say JEH 11, I'm talking about the I-primary achievement test, usually taken in grade 5 or year 6, but it can be taken by any age of candidate. 2310 last October. And then also maybe thinking about some tips and beginning to brush the surface. It's really difficult to cover everything in 1 hour. And this is why we hope to be able to extend these sessions in future in our training and meeting again, but looking at feedback and key tips to help support future candidates. And then, of course, the questions and answers. we're going to start with who is who, thinking about the content production process, thinking about who is responsible for every aspect of writing the examinations, monitoring and so forth, quality assurance. So the assessment leader. Now, this is the Pearson Edexcel manager who coordinates contracting examiners at all levels. Lots and lots of work to do arranging dates for all parts of the examining process and the marking cycle. Everything really from training sessions to ensuring that the results get back in a timely fashion to schools on time. Okay, and the content coordinator. The function of this role is to ensure that examination papers are commissioned to be written. And in fact, this is many, many months and in some cases years before the papers are being sat. Usually we'd expect a healthy timeline to look like 30 months ahead. So I will typically get an email saying, Joe, can you look at writing a paper for us that's going to be sat by students in, for example, June 2026. And this role, I'll talk to you about it in a little bit of more detail in a moment, but this role involves 10 rigorous steps of production of that paper, scrutinising the examination paper that's been written by the principal examiner for various aspects. More about this coming up. And the chair, so Anne's role. Now, this is undertaken by a senior and very highly experienced examiner, Anne, who overviews the whole process of both the primary and the lower secondary achievement test papers. She's quality assuring everything from the papers themselves to right through to examiner performance and maintaining those standards of comparability, not just for that year, that exam, but from year to year for both papers. And myself, the chief examiner. So this role is also undertaken by a senior and highly experienced examiner. I think I'm pushing the 30-year anniversary of working with Pearson, Edexcel and other exam boards now, in addition to being a teacher. I'm also the principal examiner for Year 6. So my key responsibility is to ensure that both the Year 6 and Year 9 papers maintain consistent standards in writing, in marking, in setting the level thresholds for the passes for the various grades from year to year. Currently, I'm writing examination papers for both Year 6 and Year 9, so grade 5 and grade 8. This role involves an awful lot of communication, as you can imagine, between all stakeholders working on the paper. And now let's move on to the principal examiner. So with our award with International Primary Achievement Test English and with the lower secondary achievement test, there are two principal examiners, one for Year 6 and one for Year 9. And just to clarify, I'm also the principal examiner for Year 6. So it's myself and another colleague who unfortunately can't be here with us today, but she is also highly experienced as an examiner. And the principal examiner's key role is to prepare training and quality assurance materials and also train the team, the marking team, to ensure that consistency and accuracy throughout the process. Last but not least, definitely not the least, our current subject expert is an extremely highly regarded English specialist working at a national level, working with the UK government, the Department for Education, to advise on, she actually advises us on all aspects of the construct of both papers. She's an absolute treasure and we're delighted that she's able to support our work with this particular award. Let's move on now to actually writing the papers. Let's look in a little bit more detail about this. It's a thorough and rigorous process, extremely robust. I can't emphasize that word enough. This takes, for one examination paper alone, so for example, thinking about October 2023, in October 2023, that paper had been developed over a process of around 12 months. So let's break it down into stages here. As we can see, security of the tests, confidentiality are absolutely integral to the process. We do use a secure portal. We never use email. We never share documents with key stakeholders via email. Always, it must be with that secure portal, because this is an internationally recognized and renowned award, and it is subject to due standards and security. So let's have a look at stages 1 to 2. At these two stages, the writer, so in many cases myself, I'm commissioned to select appropriate reading texts for the source booklet, and also to write the actual question paper and the mark scheme. Now, I have really strict guidelines. I've been provided with very strict guidelines by Pearson Edexcel that I have to stick to. The paper must contain a specified number of questions to ensure that all ability ranges from primary 1, P1, through to P3, make sure that there's something for everybody. Everybody has questions that they will be able to access. There are also strict instructions that assessment objectives, specified amounts must be covered throughout the questions. We must have that balance. These are detailed. We always say in the mark scheme that's distributed to schools, we always tell you which question matches with which reading assessment objective. We'll say a little bit more about this later, but further details about all the assessment objectives can be found in the iPrimary specification document. The first draft of the paper between stages 1 and 2 is then reviewed. It's reviewed by the chair, the chief, and the subject specialist that I mentioned to you. Let's move on to stage 3. This is a formal meeting. It lasts a whole day just for one examination paper, and it's hosted by the Pearson assessment leader and the content coordinator. So the principal examiner, the chair, the chief, the subject specialist, they go through all of those texts, and each question and each relating mark scheme is checked to make sure that the items are fair, they're accurate, they're robust, and they actually do the job of what we're intending at that particular targeted level of difficulty against the assessment objective. A very scientific process, rational process. After this meeting, stages 4 to 8. So just to summarize those, following the expert committee meeting, all components of the paper are examined by other experienced consultants, both to scrutinize and comment on the question paper, the mark schemes, the texts, and also that all-important clerical checking, the proofreading of all content, ensuring that this is in the appropriate house writing style protocol. We don't want to surprise candidates by having unfamiliar formats of questions, for example. So we look very carefully at aspects like that. And then finally, over the finish line there, the stages 9 to 10. This is where the chair, the chief examiner, and principal examiner review all of the previous consultant checks and agree a final sign off of the paper. And then last of all, the paper is configured by Pearson staff, by digital experts to be prepared for ePen. So, because this paper is marked, as many of you will know, I'm sure, it's actually marked online once the examination has been sat by candidates. Of course, the candidates do it on paper, but then when it arrives with us, it's actually marked online. So let's move on now to think about the actual marking process after post being taken during the examinations. So how do we ensure quality, accuracy, and consistency? I've broken this down, Anne and I have broken this down into 3 sections. So let's first think about what actually happens before anybody gets the opportunity to mark any question at all. So this is quite a process. As you can see, we've got 4 main areas here. So contracting markers. Now, the assessment leader presents a list of prospective markers to both Anne, myself, and the PE, the principal examiner for lower secondary. Our team handpick markers that we know have got proven successful teaching and examining experience of primary students. We feel that that is really important. If you've spent your life in education working with university students, for example, then you may not be familiar with primary, with assessing primary work. So we really do try to handpick experts in that field, in the primary field. Selecting training materials. So once the students have sat their examination, the papers have been couriered to Pearson Edexcel in the UK, then live responses are viewed on ePen by the Year 6 PE principal examiner, so myself. I look at lots and lots of responses for every single question. I then select appropriate training and standardization responses that I can present to my marking team and say, okay, this is the kind of response that these students are making for this question. How are we going to ensure that we award the correct mark? So to do that, we actually have, I've selected all these responses, and to do so, to actually put this to the expert committee, we hold 2 whole days of pre-standardization meetings. So I will present my responses and proposed marks to Anne, and we will look at every response, every mark that I've awarded, and we will thoroughly discuss what marks should in fact be credited and why. So we really have a strong rationale about what that question intended to assess and what the correct and acceptable answers are. So 2 whole days. And then finally, once that has all been agreed, we have a training pack. So we will be able to effectively train, talk through, discuss all of the questions, the mark scheme, using the examples taken and discussed and that we've selected for the pre-standardization meetings. So we will train our examiners. This takes place, it's a whole day. And I will present the reading texts, the question papers, the mark schemes, and I will train markers how they must apply those marks in the given training examples. During this meeting as well, there is a test for the examiner to ensure that they have taken on board and understood everything that they have been trained on. And they have to pass the standardization test to ensure that they're giving the correct marks before I give them the final say-so for marking reading and marking writing. I will not pass markers who not able to demonstrate that they understand. So that's the preparation to mark. Let's just move on now to during the marking process. So how do we ensure that the quality is the same throughout, from the first question that I mark to the last question that I mark some 3 or 4 weeks later? How do we ensure this with all of our marking team for thousands of responses? Okay, first of all, I want to talk to you about validity items, validity. So following the standardization, I will go into ePen, into our online system, and I will select items, validity items for every single reading question, every single writing response. And I will decide with Anne and sometimes with the other principal examiner, we will all review those responses and we will agree the marks. We'll put them into the system and they are secretly added into that system, and the markers do not know that they are being tested on them. So these validity items, basically they act as an automatic check that markers are being consistent in their application of the mark scheme through the whole of the marking period. In addition to that automatic process, we also do what we call back reading and sampling. So throughout the whole marking period, the committee will back read and sample a proportion of every marker's work. If an error is spotted, the mark is changed to the correct mark, and the marker is provided with both verbal and written feedback so that that error will not occur again. Also, we look at responses in review. We have a process whereby when a candidate has written something that isn't really clearly covered in the mark scheme, if markers are concerned that they feel a little bit unsure about the correct mark, they're allowed to escalate any unusual responses in review to their supervisor. So it could be their team leader might refer it to me to gain a second opinion on the mark being considered for any question at any point. Our markers are really conscientious in doing that. It takes time for them to do that, but we really appreciate their professionalism because it's so important for the candidates to get the correct mark. And then also ePen statistics are available because it's all online. The beauty of the technology is that in addition to the manual supervision that we've just talked about, Pearson can generate reports and they can feed back to our expert committee the accuracy of the whole of a marker's work in relation to both validity that I mentioned earlier and back reading samples. And we are proud thus far to have had very, very high standards of statistics generated by that. Now let's move on to the post-marking process. So we've got 5 key stages here that happen. So marker grading. So following all the statistics and all of the observations that the supervisor has undertaken with a marker, they're given a feedback grade, and this will determine if they may be reappointed in future, depending on the quality of their performance during the marking process. Level threshold setting. Now, this is undertaken by a panel comprising a Pearson standards officer, the chair, the chief, and the principal examiner. Statistics are provided, many detailed statistics by Pearson, and the panel are asked to scrutinise past papers. In addition, we call those the archive papers, in addition to current papers at all mark points, in order to determine the thresholds for, in this case, talking about iPrimary today, for what is the pass mark to get a P1, what is the pass mark to get a P2, and also for P3. Results Plus. Now, this is a unique service. I hope you are aware of this, and I hope you're making use of it because it's provided uniquely by Pearson Edexcel to enable centres to, I guess the phrase is number crunch. filter results for individual questions, or you could focus on, individual candidates and their performance. You could look at whole cohorts, particular classes. You could look even across different centres, not just in your own country, but globally. Now, of course, there is anonymity in that process. So if we're a school in India, for example, we can look how we compare in terms of performance across other IPLS centres, but we do not know their names, which I'm sure is reassuring. And then the inquiry about results process, we call it the EAR process, EAR. Once results and papers are returned to you, we never return the hard copies, we always return the PDF electronically. Once these are returned, you are able to check through your candidate's work, and should it be deemed necessary, centres may request an official review of the awarded marks. Now, this is done on the whole paper. This process, this review is always conducted by either Anne, the chair, myself, the chief, or the principal examiner. So it's always conducted by a senior person. And then last but not least, the PE report. This is written feedback given to centres. Its purpose is both to congratulate candidates for areas of improvement and strengths, but also as a working document to support teachers, to support you with identifying some of the weaker areas as trends that we've noticed that may need working on to support future candidates. So, talking about the principal examiner report, let's have a look at some important areas of feedback that were provided, in this case by myself, because I'm the PE for iPrimary, Year 6, Grade 5, from the 2023 October examination. The reading texts. So, the reading text, the theme was polar bears. I just want to mention, just going back here, I just want to mention, in case you weren't aware, that there is a marking series that takes place every June as well as every October. Typically, there are fewer candidates entering in October. It's usually comprises of schools that are perhaps entering their candidates to resit. Perhaps they were absent in May, or perhaps they want to try and improve their grade. Or it could be for centres in the Southern Hemisphere whose school year ends in December. But typically we have far fewer entries. Sorry, just moving back onto, so we're going to focus on the reading text now. The theme, which was both fiction and non-fiction, was based on polar bears. Now, both of these texts, again, I do hope you are aware of this, both are pre-released around 4 weeks prior to the examination paper. Only the texts, of course, not the questions themselves, but it is absolutely essential that schools access and explore these to your heart's content as much as you like, in as much depth as possible with your candidates that are about to take the test. You have 4 weeks to do that. This is a unique gift, if you like, for the grade 5, year 6 candidates, and it does really support them because they are, typically they're at that level of English where it is useful to explore the vocabulary and some of the underlying themes as well. So please, if you don't already, do look out for those being pre-released. Okay, just before we go any further into detail about particular questions, the iPrimary reading assessment objectives are listed here. So reading assessment objectives 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, I'm just going to go quiet for a few seconds for you to just take those in. Now, these are designated marks. Sorry, these are these designated amounts of reading assessment objectives have to be assigned in every paper. So you remember when I was talking to you about writing the paper, I need to make sure that I don't overload it with too many of this assessment objective, too few of that one. Everything is really strictly laid out for me. And just moving on to this slide now. What I recommend, this is a bit of a tip as well as we go, look to share these with the students as much as you possibly can to get them to kind of understand what is required in each of them. So, and a particular task that I found works well for me in the classroom when I'm working with students is to actually cut these statements up into strips. So like here we've got, I've just put an example here, we've got REO 3 and we've got REO 5 and REO 1. And I find a particularly useful exercise is to actually give them some questions from past papers and say, let's play a little game, let's play a matching game. Let's see if we can match the particular statement to the particular type of question. So I'll give you just a few seconds just to read through that for yourself. I'd ask my students, what are the key words that give these things away? So REO 3, identify and comment on the structure and organization of text. So we can see that the arrow that it's pointing to, this particular question is an example of the organization of text within a text using hyphens, dashes, and so on. REO 5, that is a really key one. We'll say a little bit more about this shortly, but it's looking at the writer's purposes and viewpoints and the overall effect of the text on the reader. So what is the key word in there that gives it away that it's an REO 5? Let's look at this question. It's really amazing. So we've got a quote from the booklet, from the text. Why does the writer tell us that Oslo uses the words really amazing? So within the structure of the answer, the candidate needs to make clear that it's talking about, it's the writer that's key here. So I find that this kind of matching, REO 1, for example, it's identifying and retrieving from the text. So it's a go find. Give one sign a gorilla tracker looks for. That's an example of a question, but it's go to the text, dear reader, dear candidate, and find in the example, a go find. Okay, let me just start thinking about last October by giving you an overview. Areas of strength and weakness, the 2310 series. So I've gone through, Anne and I have both gone through in a lot of detail these questions. Now, you will get a recording of this, but do feel free to, I think this might be a key one, that if you've got your smartphone handy, you might want to take a photograph of this and then refer it back to your principal examiner report. So I'll just go quiet for a few seconds just for you to have a look at those or take photographs. So from this, we can see that the most challenging, in fact, was REO 5. Remember I said about the referring to the writer is integral in these questions. And in fact, candidates did less well in 5 questions, question 10, 16, 20, 21, 23. Now we will have a look at some examples. I've also picked some out so that you can actually see what some of these questions were. Now, very pleasingly, let's celebrate the good things here because REO4 was answered really well. Now, REO4, if you remember, just go back here. REO4 is about the writer's use of language at word and sentence levels. So the students were doing really well at that. And I believe it's because those schools had taught, it's related around vocabulary and understanding themes. And I believe that those schools had accessed those pre-releases and taught them really well with their students before they took the examination. So well done to those schools. Okay, what we're going to do now is have a look at an REO4 question which wasn't well answered. A lot of candidates found this format challenging. So draw a straight line to match each emotion to the correct action. One has been done for you. So what the issue here was that 2 lines were needed to lead from one of the emotions, okay, to, so that was in fact, you know, angered, and that should have gone to roars and hisses. So this is the question. I haven't put the actual answer on here, but angered needed to have 2 lines matching, because as you can see, we've got 4 emotions and 5 actions. So maybe just this is an easily fixed one that you can look to typically at this type of question and get them to count, and, you know, reading the question carefully. Each is a really key word here. Okay, let's move on. So question 13. Now, this was covering 2 assessment objectives. How do we know that the bear is not a danger? Now, lots of candidates did get the REO1 1 mark. So, you know, they were referring to things like licking her ankle. So they're going to find it in the text, but less so the 2 marks for the REO2. That is where we're looking at the inference behind it, the underlying theme. So to be successful with REO2, the candidates need to look beyond what is said in the text and interpret the situation. So literally, the bear acted in a friendly manner. However, a bear wouldn't normally be like that. A polar bear would be extremely aggressive and would act in a completely opposite way, reading between the lines. So it's looking at, if it's 2 marks, you know, there's a clue for the candidates there that actually they need to go into more depth about this. Question 20. Just going to give you some time. This is actually, so have a look at the quotes, the question. I'm just going to give you some time just to read what's here. So a couple of things here. This would be this kind of example would be useful to as a little bit of test preparation for this type of question. And highlighting keywords as well. Give them a highlighter. They don't have to send the source booklet back to Pearson at the end of the examination. Let them highlight to their heart's content all of the keywords here. So it's the contrast of the times of 5 minutes against 5 hours that tell us about the ride. So, i.e., she doesn't really know, you know, there's such a wide difference between those times, and she doesn't really know because she's so focused on the ride itself. Let's move on to, now this is a similar example, just to compare with October 2022. It was an REO 5 for 2 marks. So again, I'm going to go quiet just to give you a little bit of reading time there. And just to help you, I've put the mark schemes. So this is how we up level from 1 to 2 marks. And in bold there, using pre-release time to pick up on interesting phrases, such as these that are quoted. So another question asking about the writer's purpose for REO 5. There does need to be a recognition, either whether they ultimately get 1 mark or 2 marks. So even implicitly saying to show, or they say, we would accept that as them making reference to the writer, but that is important. We do need to acknowledge that. So to gain 2 marks, the candidates need to go beyond the literal meaning of the size of the plane or the size of the river. There should be a more thorough explanation of the comparison of the two and why the writer has actually chosen to put those two together in that quoted phrase. So I think the key thing here is when you're looking at these pre-releases, do try to preempt which interesting sentences and phrases may be picked up on. Okay, so the contrast of the spot of black on the vast sweep of blue, look at the mark scheme, and you know, in comparison with what the students are going to respond like. Okay, now this one is a really quick fix. We've noticed over several series now that candidates are really slipping a bit with this, and it's such an easy one to pull back. So give one reason why a reader would want to keep reading this story. So it is a familiar format. It does appear in every paper, and candidates can easily be prepared how to answer this question. Now, the key thing is that generic answers are not acceptable. Sometimes students will say, because it's a really exciting story, or it really gripped me, or I really want to find out what happened next. No, it's got to make reference to a reason why we want to continue reading that story. Now, interestingly, in the 2310 text about the polar bear, some responses, the student said to find out if she got home. Well, that actually isn't credit worthy, because in the text it does say that she got home. So, you know, do talk this one through, because it's a mark, and that little, you know, that 1 mark could make all of the difference. Okay. Now let's have a look at some. I'm just going to make some general points here, but just bearing in mind that today is an overview of things that we can do, and we are hoping to be able to put together some more training sessions where we can look in more depth about these things. So I'm just going to put these on one by one so that you can have a read. What do your students read? How do you source your texts? Do you read aloud to your class? All of these things give a lot of need a lot of thinking about. There are 12,000 new high quality children's texts produced every year. We don't have to keep relying on our old favourites. So let's give the candidates an opportunity to look at, it could be, you know, perfectly anonymous. It could be like you know, you wouldn't have the child's name on from last year, but, you know, looking at some of their answers and then think, okay, sorry, I think we need to, someone needs to mute themselves there. Thank you. Yeah, giving them, discussing just as a class, you know, this is the mark scheme, this is the question, this is what that candidate wrote. How can, you know, how could we change that? How can we improve that? Why did they get that mark? And, you know, practice actually giving them marks as well. So we wouldn't necessarily say that the student got 2 marks or 1 mark. We would get the students to look at it against the mark scheme. So the students taking on the role of the examiner. And then, you know, okay, this student didn't get a mark, you know, why do you want to carry on reading the story? Because it's a lovely story. Get the students to up-level poorly answered responses. How can we change that to be worth 1 mark? And then, you know, let's have a go. Instead of doing endless practice papers, all of the questions, let's just do a few of them and let's peer mark. Let's have a look as a class, or, you know, with your talk partner. What, you know, here's the mark scheme now. What do you think? How should we mark this together? And I just think it gives the students that understanding of actually analysing the quality of their own work. And, you know, last but not least, little and often is really more effective than ploughing through endless past papers. It's more constructive, it encourages active learning, and it encourages critical thinking. So we'll have a go at some of these things in future sessions, but, you know, just to summarise before we go over to you guys, key tips here. So that bullet point 3 is, of course, REO 5. And past papers. Okay, I'm just going to very briefly go through grammar, punctuation and spelling. As you can see, we have a total of 15 marks for this aspect of the test. And by and large, candidates do pick up a lot of marks. The writing aspect is also just 15 marks because we know that students find it really hard to use and apply their grammar, spelling and punctuation in a task. So this one, what I would encourage you, just to save a little bit of time here, maybe take a photograph of this and go back to your principal examiner report and the question paper. Davika, I'm not sure what slide you were referring to. Sorry, probably picked it up too late in the chat. Okay, so this one I think will be useful to take a photograph of. Let's have a look. Tips, key tips. Okay, let's just go back then, guys. Key tips, okay? If anybody would like to take a photograph of that. Okay, I'll talk about the resources at the end, okay? Right, so let's just move on. Now, the writing, it was, as we can see here, your chosen conservation organisation, persuading others in your school to raise funds to support it. Here, just for your reference, are the 3 writing assessment objectives. Writing assessment objectives. So Candidates did well by, and candidates did less well because. So just have a look at those again. This might be a useful one to take an image of, a screenshot. The difficulty with, bullet point 3 on where candidates didn't do so well, they would write really lengthy. They'd spend a long time maybe setting it out like a letter and putting the address and things like that. And it's really, that's not going to impress and get any extra marks. So it's really so important to be able to, to get straight to the point. They've only got about 25 minutes for this, so it's really important to get the timing right and get stuck in. And you are allowed to remind them as well during the test administration that they've if they haven't started their writing yet, it might be a good idea to do so. So sometimes students losing track of what they're talking about. We know that writing is difficult, but again, it's those things like planning, being able to plan before you start. Those tasks I feel pretty certain that schools are already doing with their candidates, because we have seen a really pleasing improvement in children's writing over the years. Clearly, lots of you are covering your curriculum really well and taking the opportunity to look at non-fiction writing and fiction writing and do that. Okay, so again, you might want to screenshot this. I'm not going to talk to this slide. I think it's again a kind of a key tips slide. So quick read through and take a screenshot if you wish. Okay, so I'm just going to move on. Now, to access the materials, if you have got access to Active Learn Primary, there is the website, and on the website you can access the specification documents which talk about the different assessment objectives, like we've mentioned about reading, and you can also get sample assessment materials as well. Now, what I'm going to do, because some colleagues have been asking me during this meeting, I'm going to refer you to the Training for Pearson department, and I am going to send them a pack of these materials so that you don't have to go looking on websites in case you can't log in and things like that. So I am going to make available for you sample assessment materials, the specifications, and the principal examiner report. I've been referring to various questions in today's overview, and if you haven't accessed the principal examiner report from October, then we'll make that available as a pack. So your first go-to is with the training department that you booked your webinar through. I will be speaking to them after today's session. Okay, now there was a lot to cover. The primary paper is actually quite long because we've got the grammar section as well.
You have been very thorough. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.